And this is week 78 of our weekly discussions. Today, we're discussing underreported wars and ways we can help. So this is the Christian Effective Altruism group. Effective altruism is two things. It's an idea about using careful reasoning and evidence to do as much good as possible, and also to take action on that basis, not just to discuss this idea, but also to take action. It's also a community of people who are committed to this idea and who want to support each other to better reflect on this idea and put it into practice. So we are a group of Christians within the Effective Altruism community. And today, we're discussing underreported wars. And to guide this discussion, I had some helpful input from a few of you, especially from Danny, also from Julian, who couldn't make it here today. But one thing that Julian shared was the Council on Foreign Relations Global Conflict Tracker, which is a really helpful tool. It flags a bunch of different areas in the world where there's some kind of sustained conflict. That could be a war, whether it's a civil war or international war, or even just like a conflict. It tracks that. And you can go there and get kind of a brief profile on each of these. And I want to just look at 5. And these 5 that I chose to look at, somewhat random selection, but somewhat representative of different world regions, are the conflict between Turkey and armed Kurdish groups, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, some instability in Myanmar, especially with the Rohingya, the civil war in South Sudan, and also the conflict with the Boko Haram in Nigeria. So starting out with the first here, between looking at the conflict between Turkey and the armed Kurdish groups. This is taking place here on this star. For each of these, I'm putting a star kind of where in the world we're talking about, in case these regions are unfamiliar. And with this conflict, we're talking about Kurdistan and the Kurds especially. If you're not familiar with the Kurds, they're an ethnic group. They've existed for a very long time. There's approximately 30 million Kurds who are living in the Middle East, primarily in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And right now, Kurds comprise nearly 1/5 of Turkey's population. But there's been conflict because the Kurds don't actually have a nation state, and there's been growing conflict, especially since the 70s and 80s. Different Kurdish groups, especially the PKK, has been waging an insurgency for more rights, for more representation. And the ongoing conflict has resulted in nearly 40,000 deaths in Turkey. And there's been a lot of persecution of Kurds. There's been, I like even the words Kurds and Kurdistan and Kurdish were officially banned by the Turkish government. And there have even been, even the language has been prohibited in public and private life in many parts. So there's been off and on conflict between Kurdish groups and between the Turkish government. Both sides have been accused of numerous human rights abuses. The European Court of Human Rights has condemned Turkey for thousands of human rights abuses, in fact, including many really gruesome things: torture, forced displacements, destroyed villages, and so forth. And yeah, this is just a really awful situation. It's not only led to tens of thousands of deaths, but also lots of arrests. More recently, there's been growing discontent under the Erdogan regime, seen in the Gezi Park protests in 2013. There was a ceasefire after that, but then a bombing in 2015 caused even more conflict, leading up to a coup in Turkey in 2016. Erdogan, the president in Turkey, he cracked down, and there's been an estimated 50,000 arrests. A lot of these are extrajudicial. And there's also just been more conflict with the rise of ISIS and ISIS in North Syria and Iraq, kind of pressing up against between the Turkish regions and the Syrian and Iraqi regions against the Kurds, and the Kurds have suffered quite a bit. So just to wrap up with this cause area, some big concerns is just the weak political representation of the Kurds, their disenfranchisement. I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of people here. many arrests, extrajudicial arrests, many human rights abuses here, and also the risk that if there is some kind of cessationist movement from Kurds, it could lead to like a new wave of secession movements across the Middle East, which would amplify regional instability. So I'm sure I'm missing details on each of these, so you have to forgive me. I have to leave many details out, many backstories out, just to cover more different conflicts today. But the next conflict I want to touch on is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and Danny provided me some slides on this. So this is the region between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and what happened was back in the early 1900s, there was conflict between the ethnic Azeri majority and the Armenians, especially following the Armenian genocide, which led to something like close to 1 million deaths. It was a really awful thing that happened in the early 20th century. We often don't talk about it. But what happened was there was fighting that broke out, and the Soviets actually imposed some kind of political borders and maintained just a loose, very loose order, and they carved out a part of Azerbaijan to give still technically to Azerbaijan, but it had about 95% Armenian population, and this is the region where the recent conflict has come out. Many of you have maybe followed this in the news, but even long before there's been conflict in this area. But more recently, there've been increased shellings, and Azerbaijan has come in and taken control of much of the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was ceded under the Soviets as a kind of special zone. But Azerbaijan has taken more control of this, and many Armenians have fled. Thousands of Armenians have fled this whole region, and some concerns is that without successful mediation efforts, these ceasefire violations and renewed tensions threaten to reignite some even more military conflicts, destabilizing even more in the South Caucasus region, leading to even more thousands of deaths and many more refugees. There's also like an oil gas consideration here. Azerbaijan produces like about 1 million barrels of oil a day, which is especially relevant right now with the Ukraine situation. So I want to just move on to instability in Myanmar, touching especially on the Rohingya population. So the Rohingya, they're a highly persecuted Muslim group numbering over 1 million, and they're facing discrimination both from their neighbors and from their nation. They're not considered citizens by Myanmar's government, and after waves of violence and riots in 2012, it's really only intensified. More than 100,000 Muslim Rohingyans were internally displaced, and many were killed. Most recently, there was a case of backlash where the Rohingyans, I think a couple of Rohingyans went out and they attacked some members in the government that were oppressing them from their view, and the government just responded in turn with a really brutal crackdown on Rohingyan villages. This was back in 2017, causing over 700,000 people to flee the border into Bangladesh since August 2017. And there's just widespread reports of indiscriminate killings and burnings of Rohingyan villages, escalating to the point that the UN Human Rights Commissioner called the situation a textbook, quote, a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. So here's a photo of a Buddhist monk who's actually protesting the situation in Rohingya and just crying out for justice. More recently, there was a coup in Myanmar back in February 2021. And this detained the senior leadership in the democratically elected government. And there's big concerns here about human rights abuses, about democracy now, and also of Myanmar's strategic location in Southeast Asia. Here's just an image of the Basan Char, which is actually an island on a silt island in Bangladesh, where many Rohingyans have been evacuated to in Bangladesh. And here's actually a photo of this island during the flood season. It's really precarious, a lot of these situations that these Rohingyans are forced into. And it's just a shocking image of this settlement. Next, want to look at the civil war in South Sudan. And this erupted in 2013 following a political struggle between Kiir and Makar that led to Makar, then vice president, his removal from power. And then what happened was violence erupted between the presidential guard soldiers from the two largest ethnic groups in South Sudan. Makar, who was taken out from power as vice president, he attempted a coup. The violence quickly spread across regions, and there were many regional armed outbreaks, and also many civilians got caught up in the conflict. Really, quite a lot of civilians. Official casualties are really difficult to confirm, but one April 2018 study confirmed that nearly 400,000 people were killed during the 5 years of war, and an additional 4 million were internally displaced or fled the country. Here's an image of some South Sudanese playing in what is a makeshift UN shelter for victims of war. Also, this conflict has led to a lot of food insecurity, really awful situation. I mean, the UN Security Council declared their food crisis the worst in the world back in 2014. It's been followed by famine, and really anywhere from 5 to 8 million people at risk of food insecurity and in need of humanitarian assistance. So there's also a risk of like destabilization spilling over into other regions as well. Last, I want to just look at the Boko Haram conflict in Nigeria. So Boko Haram, they are one of the largest Islamist military groups in Africa, and they've conducted many terrorist attacks on religious and political groups, on local police, on military, as well as just on civilians in busy markets and villages. And Nigeria particularly has had difficulty with Boko Haram. Nigeria, as you may very well know, is the largest by population country in Africa. I mean, if you were to take Nigeria's population and just comprise it of US state population, you would get to over half the US. Nigeria has about 206 million people there. This whole red half of this image would be Nigeria, really large population. And as a result, this kind of terrorism left uncontrolled has really had awful effects. Boko Haram have killed tens of thousands of people, resulted in the deaths of estimated more than 300,000 children, and displaced over 2 million from their homes. So in the mid-2010s, the Global Terrorism Index identified Boko Haram as actually the world's deadliest terror group. More recently, they came in the news because there was a kidnapping of over 200 girls, I think in 2014. And yeah, many of these girls haven't been released. Really sad story, but I still remember back, what was that? 8 years ago, I still remember that making the news, the American news. But much of the other attacks they carry out, the people that are constantly displaced, this doesn't break the news every day. So with that heavy introduction, I just want to usher us into discussion. Here are some things we can discuss. Are there any conflicts you'd like to learn more about, including maybe one that wasn't listed today, but maybe is listed on the Council for Foreign Relations, or maybe wasn't even listed there? I don't think, for instance, the situation with the Uyghurs in China was listed there, for instance. Another thing we can discuss is whether there's a conflict that strikes you as particularly pressing, maybe for personal reasons, or maybe also just for ethical reasons. Do you think effective altruists or people concerned about doing good effectively should focus on any particular conflict here? Finally, what are some ways that we can help using our donations, using our career, through volunteering, or just through prayer? Are there ways we can help? I mean, we can certainly pray for God to work through the hearts of the rulers who are putting on oppression. We can also certainly pray for the victims. And I would encourage you in your breakout room, or maybe we can all together pray at the end. I would encourage us to do that. So.